The Vice President of Sales and Operations for the Large Format and Restoration Group at FotoKem. Andrew serves as the VP of Sales and Operations for that group that was established in 2004, and they provide lab, video, and digital services for the 65mm world and mixed format film projects. Andrew's a great guy, a wealth of information, and a really fabulous member of our technical committee. So we've got a great panel here to discuss the kind of dizzying array of deliverable products that we have for the giant screen world. So I'm going to hand it over to Andrew Oran. Oh, and one other thing. We still have a bunch of the production and post-production workflow documents you can see over at Tammy there. Pick one up if you've got time, because it's a great doc to have, and they are available on the website in PDF, and we're building a wiki page, so it'll be available in a bunch of formats, but grab one on the way out. Thanks.
Hey everybody. I think that introduction is probably longer than all of our presentations. What you're about to see is speed dating for the giant screen cinema panel. We are going to cram in the next hour 7 panelists who are going to quickly explain to you some of the basics of giant screen deliverables for exhibition and how production and exhibition and archiving sort of group together neatly. And then we're also going to take a look at giant screen deliverables for the home, how that market has grown and what's coming up ahead in that market. The speakers are going to come up and speak and then have a seat here. At the end, we'll do Q&A. Okay, never used one of these. Awesome. In the old days, which we can also think of as the infancy of giant screen cinema, it always helps to lead off with a cute baby. Things were a lot simpler. You shot a 65mm 15-perf giant screen film with an IMAX 2D camera, you cut together your negative, and you produced 70mm 15-perf prints. You might have made an interpositive as protection in case of a negative break, and a 65mm internegative if your release print count was going to be high. You might have customized your prints for the domes by printing them on a different stock, or with some shots that were optically reduced in size for easier viewing. But all in all, post-production and distribution followed a fairly linear path, and you ended up with that as your deliverable. A stack of 65mm negative. That's one eye of an IMAX 15-perf film. As the giant screen industry grew, an alternate 70mm exhibition format emerged that was 8-perf 70mm. Creating 70mm 8-perf prints required making a 65mm 8-perf duplicate negative on an optical printer. And the first home video deliverables came about, requiring a standard definition video transfer for VHS and DVD distribution. And then IMAX 3D appeared, which along with the digital revolution changed everything. On the film side, things have arguably gotten a little simpler. 8-perf is almost gone. 65mm 15-perf internegatives, duplicate negatives, are rare. 65mm printing negatives are usually recorded out now from a digital intermediate rather than cut together from individual pieces of film. It's not uncommon nowadays to also have a dome negative, a customized version of the entire film designed for the dome. But we now have a wide array of digital exhibition and home video deliverables. This is an example of an LTO tape on which our digital deliverables are archived. This is an example of a hard drive. So while we have a lot more deliverables nowadays, they're considerably lighter. This raises a whole host of issues. Who pays for all the new deliverables? The producer, the distributor, the exhibitor? How do we deal with the wide and at times incompatible range of resolutions and file formats that are inherent to the different digital cameras that are now used to capture giant screen films? And how do we create adaptable, full-resolution archives of our films now that we're no longer capturing and compiling them on the wonderful self-archiving medium of 65mm film? What are the latest deliverables on our laundry list? All that takes us to our first presenter. First presenter is a fellow named James Manke. He's with RPG Productions. He's a post-production supervisor, editor, negative cutter, problem solver, and longtime contributor to dozens of giant screen films. He's here today to lay out deliverables issues that come up in production, post, and archiving.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'm going to try to give you a brief overview of DI, large format deliverables, and archiving. So current methods right now, we have multiple capture mediums. There's still some 15 perf, 65 negative. You've got a lot of pro digital cameras in various formats, resolutions. You've got some DSLR cameras, largely used for time-lapse photography. You've got some prosumer cameras. You've got drones. And you even have some consumer cameras, like a GoPro in certain situations. And so this leads to a variety of, like I said, resolutions, formats, everything that you can think of. So then you have to go through basically a meat grinder in the DI process. You've got different systems like a Pablo or a Mystica. And then here's where you'll work with an expert to color grade and to adjust geometry for 3D, your vertical, horizontal, zoom difference, rotational, keystoning, and then come up with framing for a dome, for your flat screen, 133, 185, all these different, mostly large format deliverables that will then lead into some of your ancillary markets. In these systems, you can think of it like a word processing program or even, a presentation program. You have a lot of layers in terms of all the different power windows you can put in, all these different things, and they're not interoperable. You can't take your project and go from one system to another. Years down the road, you won't be able to necessarily open an old project. Next up is your actual deliverables. There's still a need for film in the large format community. That generally comes now from either complete film sources, pretty rare. Usually have a partial film source, or you go an entire DI route and come out with a 4096 by 3072 digital file that gets film recorded. Then you also have, 4K digital cinema for IMAX, 4K digital cinema for DCI. You've got 2K, you've got, 2K digital cinema, and you've got Ultra HD or HD TV down the road. So some of these you can quickly and easily derive from one, just to, have the numbers or trim off a little bit on the sides. But we'll get into some of the difficulties in these different formats in a bit. Archiving. Film storage is pretty standard. You put those away in a vault and basically forget about them. You've got hard drives for kind of short-term storage. You're easily moving, your digital files around, and it's pretty, open and accessible on various computers and systems around there. LTO tape is a sort of long-term digital storage. And all that sounds pretty simple, from even the, childhood or adolescent ages of large format. But there's a lot of problems and pitfalls that come into this whole process. First up is all these different formats. Basically an alphabet soup of file types for your capture, for your delivery, for anything along this whole process. And then you have, color space from your recording to your output, your bit depth, all these things that, complicate and compound over the whole process of production and post-production. And you shouldn't have to wait until you get into post to make some decisions that are going to affect you when you get to post. For example, a lot of people love the idea of getting a free camera. My cousin's boyfriend has a camera that's, sitting in his garage. You can use that for free, and that's great, but is it going to give you what you need when you get to post, when you get to your distribution? or are you going to be handicapped down the road? Another aspect to consider is the limited range. And then some of the next panelists will go deeper into this, but ideally you want to capture as much of your dynamic, color space as you can and keep that through the entire process, so when your final deliverable is there, you can extract from that what you need. There's also an issue of resolution in terms of limiting yourself. Not all 4K is the same. You can have a compressed 4K from a small sensor is not the same as an uncompressed 4K from a much larger sensor. Next is framing and pacing. Trying to fit a large format film that's made for a dome onto a TV or vice versa doesn't work that well. This topic could be a panel unto itself, with filmmakers arguing about what works on a large screen, what doesn't work on a large screen, and there's more of an aesthetic issue with this than a technical. This is an example what typically gets termed the sacred master. It shows the 15 per 65 millimeter negative frame, and there's kind of a dome shape within there. And basically your kind of sweet spot or ideal framing for a dome is that lower middle third. You can kind of see a little shape there for that. That's typically where you want the action, because in a dome, most everything else is well over somebody's head. And this will work okay when you go to, a flat, large format screen. And you can even just simply crop off the top, and it'll work pretty well for digital cinema. The problem becomes when you get farther down the road into television, your framing is so small, you don't have the aesthetic of a wide shot to a medium shot to a close-up to an extreme close-up. It basically all plays as a wide shot, so you don't have that dynamic, aesthetic in your post deliverables. Here's kind of an example of a 5K 5120 by 2700 is the dark blue rectangle there. If you were to crop out, a lot of people shoot, their digital cinema epics or what have you with this 5K. And this is where it's come up in the last few days. People say, 6K, 8K or above is the minimum. Here's an example, because if you shoot 5K and you have to crop out a 133, you're down to 3600 by 2700. And so you'd have to blow that up 14% just to get back to 4K. So you can see also in that dome-safe area how small of an area your sweet spot is in this full 189 or 190 aspect ratio. So that's why 6K or 8K is currently being pushed as the minimum. And you can try to fit everything into one, but you're going to compromise somewhere, and sometimes you wind up compromising everywhere and getting something that doesn't work well on the big screen and doesn't work as well on the smaller screen. Archiving, longevity of your file formats and your film archives. You can put stuff on film, but if you don't store it well, it may not last. It will deteriorate. Hard drives fail. Digital formats become obsolete. Every camera now captures a raw format, and they're not interoperable. You don't know 20, 50 years down the road if you're going to be able to reopen your files and go back and do a new DI or pull stock footage that you shot before. You also have issues of LTO. LTO is great. They say about 15 to 30 years because there's always increasing the level of complexity in these that can store more data. So currently, as of last December, they have LTO 7, and that will allow you, if you have an LTO 7 reader and writer, basically a drive, you can go back 2 generations. So if you had an LTO 4 tape, you would not be able to read it on an LTO 7 drive. So you basically have to migrate your data every 15 to 30 years to make sure it's still going to be accessible. Otherwise, you can keep an old LTO2 drive on mothballs and hope that it works in the future. You also have issues, again, with the digital formats. You know, does a company that you invested in their camera and worked with their formats, do they go bankrupt in the future and you can't work with those anymore? You know, so film's been around a long time. You know, this is a still from a film from 1923. You know, 90 years later, they mastered it in 2K and created a HD Blu-ray. And I'm sure in 1923, they weren't envisioning HD Blu-rays. So some of that is luck, and some of that is, you know, a perseverance of people involved in this process. So the question is, are the formats and the processes you're doing, are they going to last for the next 90 years or 5 or 10 years and be able to be shown in different formats and different deliverables? You know, and what are those deliverables going to be, and how are you going to get from one to the next one? Thank you.
Thank you, James. Okay. This is a dangerous mic. Myles Connolly is a veteran in the large format film industry with credits on more than 40 giant screen films. In his 25 years in the business, he's been involved in both production and post. He's worked with McGilvery Freeman Films, BBC Earth, SK Films, and National Geographic. He's been lucky to be involved in some of the most successful films in the format, including Everest, Flight of the Butterflies, Wild Africa, and many others, and he's still learning. He's here to offer up a producer's perspective on the challenge of budgeting for giant screen deliverables and accounting for them before production. Myles?
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everybody, for coming. You are a hardy bunch. Anybody who comes to a seminar on deliverables, you have my full respect. So I'm going to give you a producer's perspective. It's actually a pretty low-tech perspective, but it comes from a lot of years of experience and pain and suffering. I was lucky enough to be around in the film days, and as Andrew presented earlier, it was so easy. We thought it was hard, but we didn't know what was coming. Nowadays, it is so incredibly complex, and sadly, I don't have a beautiful PowerPoint like James, so I'm going to just try and make it work with wit and lighthearted banter. Today, deliverables lists are all over the place, to be perfectly honest. There is no set standard list. I have projects that have 30 items, and I have projects that have over 300 items. And as Andrew said, I'm here to present budget numbers. Not really, because just like the project and the uniqueness of each project, there is no set or standard price tag for a bunch of deliverables. At the very lowest level, I'll give you a range. At the very lowest level, it's probably about $50,000 for a very limited number of items. At the top range, it's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, upwards of $300,000. So for anybody who came and has their pencil sharpened and ready to start jotting down numbers, I can't give you those numbers. What I would suggest is that you go to the usual suspects like IMAX Post and RPG and Andrew at FotoKem, and you give them the details of your project, and they'll give you back a very reasonable and friendly quote, and then you start working with that. But it's particularly interesting to me that a lot of people start talking about deliverables at the back end of the filmmaking process. And what I've learned, and learned the hard way, is the time to start talking about deliverables is actually at the front end of the process. When you're talking about camera choices, when you're talking about workflow, when you're talking about post-production, all of those things are impacted by those early decisions. And this week has been particularly interesting for me because it's the first time that we haven't projected IMAX film at a conference. And I found that to be quite a startling realization. But what it tells you is that digital capture and digital technology have gotten to a place where if they're not as good as IMAX film, certainly in the market and the demands of the market, that is the standard now. So we have this huge toolbox of amazing tools and the ability to think about the shots as opposed to what can we do with a camera. We can now pretty much come up with any shot and plug in the right technology to make that shot happen. But as James was pointing out, it's not unusual on one of our projects to have a dozen different types of capture technology. And you get into a situation where if you're not careful, you can start capturing stuff and spending time and money and effort on location and really regret it when you get back to post-production. So one of the things that I strive to do, and it takes a lot of effort, and I'm not proud, I'm happy to let younger, more enthusiastic, energetic people do this for me as well, is to really stay on top of the technology, to really research what's going on out there and understand. As James was saying, a lot of people will tell you, oh, it's a 4K camera. Well, is it a 4K camera in terms of resolution? What's the codec? Is it uncompressed? Is it raw? Is it shooting 422, 8-bit 422? Like, there are a lot of really critical questions that come up. And if you're not honest with yourself, because to be honest, if somebody said, I've got a 12K camera and I'll give it to you for $2,000 a week, I'd snatch it, because that just sounds amazing. But if you're not careful, you can get caught out later, and I've been caught out a few times. So understanding the technology, making the effort, really pushing to maximize the quality, and not just reading the sales brochure and walking away thinking you know what you're doing, is critical to success. So coming back to this week, we are in a new paradigm. It is a revolutionary time for filmmakers. There's never been a better time to be a giant screen filmmaker. And yet, there's never been a scarier time to be a giant screen filmmaker. Because I think that all of this new technology, new projection technology, how these films are made and finished and delivered is actually setting us up for potential disaster. Because as it used to be with film, we understood the photochemical process. We could go to David Keeley, or we could go to Rick Gordon, we could go to the labs, we'd go through the answer print process, and we knew exactly what we were getting because we saw it on the screen. But nowadays, the technology and the workflow is so complex, and there are so many branches in the decision tree where what seem to be rather innocuous decisions are being made that can just kill you later on. And who's making those decisions? Hopefully it's somebody like Andrew or Rick or David Keeley, but oftentimes it's a second-year university student who's a camera intern who just decides that he likes this setting on the red because it worked for him at school. And you find out later, like, Jesus, man, what were you thinking? Like, that's the worst thing ever. So you really have to be on top of this stuff, and it is incredibly, incredibly complex. So I've seen stuff this week that was mind-blowingly good, shot by people that I have huge respect for. I've seen some stuff this week, including some of my stuff, that really caught me off guard. And I think that as producers and as filmmakers, we need to be vigilant about how we're using this new technology and make sure that we're not just delivering content that's good enough, but we're striving to produce the very best content. And I think somebody used a phrase, better than film. I mean, we are at a place where the technology will soon be better than film, and that's what we need to do. Finally, yeah, it's clear. I mean, digital capture is here to stay. It's going to dominate the marketplace. We always push for better quality, understand the technology, know that a quality film-going experience means repeat business. A poor quality film-going experience means crickets, and nobody wants that. For me, at the end of the day, as a producer, it comes down to balance. We have a budget, we have a schedule, we have creative ambition, we have the technology. No one of those things can dominate. And my job is to find a way to put all of those things together to create the very best film that we can. And it's often quite a struggle. So I would urge everybody to do what I do, which is to go to the experts, to talk to the people that are doing this on a daily basis and ask them, you know, how would you do it? What are you doing? What's the latest? What have you heard? Because if you try and do it yourself, you'll never keep up. And these guys, just like me, we're all really happy to talk to anybody about this stuff. A, because we love it. I mean, that was James at his most passionate, talking about deliverables and archiving. But you know, he'll go and talk for hours about that stuff if you have the tolerance to go through it with him. And I'm the same way. If somebody has a question about archiving or deliverables or capture technology, don't be afraid to ask. Everybody's film should be hugely successful. There's no reason to get into this game and produce something that isn't the very best quality that you can achieve. And I want to help you because I want your film to be successful so that people will come back and see my film. If your film is a bomb, it's bad for you, but it's bad for me too. So don't be afraid to engage with the experts, the vendors and the suppliers to try and get yourself off to the very best start possible. Anyway, that's it from Myles. Thank you.
It strikes me that deliverables were almost always, they took care of themselves. When we were shooting on 65 millimeter 15 perf negative, the prints were an accurate reproduction of that negative, and other deliverables that developed up until recently were lower resolution versions of the 15 perf that were acceptable, like a standard def or a high definition video, or an 8 perf format of a film. We then went through a phase when the industry went 3D, where we went to lower resolution cameras, and we were able to make acceptable giant screen films for 15 perf 70 exhibition then. What's happened now, though, is there are other deliverables that only look good from either digital cameras that are only now being developed, only now hitting market, or always from 15 perf negative. You go back to our classic films and they make the most gorgeous laser IMAX masters or high dynamic range masters. So we're now, one of the purposes of the panel is to make you aware of the new technology that's driving this imperative to capture at the highest resolution possible. It used to be easy to do that. You just shot 15 perf negative. That really isn't practical anymore from a number of different angles, particularly the 3D angle. But if you want to exploit the very high resolution or high dynamic range deliverable opportunities that exist, you need to take your camera capture into account. Anyway, I want to bring up our next presenter. This is Christian Straub. He's with IMAX. He's the director of post-production and original content there. He's got a wide-ranging technical knowledge of this format from film to digital and an unflagging helpfulness in the trenches. And though he's personally involved in producing the full gamut of giant screen deliverables, we've asked him today to explain digital deliverables that are unique to IMAX Corp. Christian.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Andrew asked me to come in and speak a little bit about IMAX digital cinema deliverables. And first of all, we're a full post house, full range of services that we offer at IMAX. Scanning, film recording, and other, every possible service that we provide. But Andrew pointed out something in an email that we prepared all this content for GSCA, for our laser projection system. And we got content was delivered to us in many different formats, including some content that was just 8-bit. 8-bit content has 256 steps from your black to your white, which our laser system is a high dynamic range system. And obviously it's going to look very crunchy and not very good if you deliver that way. We always ask that filmmakers deliver the highest possible, the best quality images and formats that are possible. Finishing in 4K is recommended. I don't know if any of you were here for the North of Superior presentation. It was yesterday, I believe. There was a shot in there. That all came from an 8K scan of the IP. We're very lucky in that all our films, we have film elements to actually scan and go for archival purposes. If we didn't have that, we'd be in a lot of trouble with some of these shows, because we do restore the original 8K scans to get some of these things done. And sometimes we do find corruption. And our only way out of that is to go back to the original elements and scan them. And we did that last week for one of our legacy documentaries for some VR projects that are going on. However, the different formats that things are delivered in for GSCA, is challenging at times. We people deliver everything from QuickTime to 16-bit TIFFs. When it's less than that, we do find it very challenging to put something presentable on screen. But I don't have a slide show or a presentation here. I was asked yesterday by my boss to sit in for him. Bruce Markoe was going to speak here today, but he asked me to come and speak for him. He's very busy, as I am, but I'm here anyway. But 16-bit deliveries have 32,000 steps from your black to your white. So you can see how an 8-bit delivery wouldn't quite be up to par in that respect. But I'll be available for questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Actually, one of the deliverables, or the archival deliverables that Christian just reminded me of, and that's becoming more common now, is after digitizing one of these 15 perf titles, we actually create an 8K raw scan archive. So you can take that 8K archive, it becomes your new digital negative, and you could then use it to create any future deliverables that you might need to, even if you've scanned the element to create one specific deliverable. It's kind of important to scan the highest resolution uncompressed archive that you can so that you don't have to go back to the film elements in case they become damaged or faded over time. Anyway, that's one more deliverable to keep in mind that hasn't been on any of our lists. We're going to segue now to the home market, and I want to bring up Ryan Mullins to kind of kick off this phase of the session. Ryan is the founder and owner of Big Picture Digital Productions. He's a giant screen pioneer who, over the last 20 years, has been involved in almost every milestone associated with the advent of giant screen titles in the home, having worked on over 50 films released in 8 packaged formats and countless digital formats. We're hoping he can bring us up to speed on how this market has developed, where it is now, and where it's heading. And I also learned one other thing about Ryan. In all of this time, and all these nights he spent at the bar at countless giant screen events, he's never spoken in front of a giant screen audience. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Well, good afternoon. It's been a tremendous conference, and for me, I think one of the most informative ones that I've been to in the last few years, and I've been coming 19 years now. Just a child when I started, of course. It's a cliche now in any industry to talk about sea change and dramatic shifts in the way we do things. And just as we're going through that in the giant screen industry, we're going through that very much in the home entertainment industry, where we've undergone in the last 2 years a complete ecosystem change, a drive towards that. And it's been a very slow, arduous process, typical as you would expect. But they wanted to get it right, and they didn't want to just shift from high definition to a greater resolution format. They wanted to address these age-old issues of wanting to increase the quality of the color space, high dynamic range, higher frame rates, and the way to do that, of course, was to do that when you were going to change software, hardware deliveries to televisions, a player, and the discs. So that's all underway now, and it's been very challenging and requiring more patience than I usually like to hold on to. But we're there now. The first title from our industry that I'm producing currently will be out in June, Journey to Space, and it will be one of the first native 4K titles in the 4K UHD format. And so there's a lot of anticipation about this. And we're going to be talking about, I'm followed by some brilliant and far better educated colleagues who are going to explain the technical part of this. But I thought, as someone who deals with both the production and marketing and distribution into the ancillary market, it's important for me to establish the why. I can imagine the process. I know I've been around films getting produced, the arduous and difficult and nail-biting process, running out of money at the end, what are you going to cut? What are you going to focus on? And someone mentions, well, what about the home video version? It's like, oh, get out of the room. You know, I'm trying to finish the film here. But I want to bring up the sort of importance and the role that our industry has played in the home entertainment world, where it's been at the forefront of pioneering of every new format. And has very high regard in that world with the consumer electronics manufacturer. We've bundled, we've been first in so many marketplaces, and once again, that world is looking at us to set the bar of reference quality material, as we've done for many formats with the new UHD spec. I should, you know, I owe it to myself also at this part, so I can go through that list of deliverables that most people are aware of, this technical straight-up deliverables that we're going to talk about. But there's some others that also to be aware of that are more content and editorial, which is things like when you're out there, make a good making of, gather extra material, think about the things that are going to help market the film, not just for home video distribution, but for promoting the film, for getting great online attraction, you know, you're beefing up your Facebook page, etc., things like that. There's also the boring but very important legal part, which is, you know, the three things that kind of trip people up are preparing to clear all the rights for home entertainment, not just for your theatrical distribution, for everywhere from your entertainment, your music, etc. And then, you know, a smaller point is your languages. So many people will make deals and have theaters produce languages for them and not negotiate the right to use that language later on their own home entertainment releases. So those just some notes for people it's their first time around. Luckily, I'm very proud that most of my clients I've made many projects with, so we've gone through this together, and now they know what I'm going to expect when it comes down to that time. And then a straight-up music, you know, for new people, and it ties to, of course, all your sort of legal approach to your theatrical distribution, music cue sheet, chain of title, and copyright, proof of copyright. That's the kind of thing that we're going to need when we go out to make any distribution deals in the ancillary market. You know, but you know, I want to finish off where what I alluded to is why. Why is it important to care about the small screen in the large screen industry? I will cheekily say that for the most, in my experience, I think that, and it's not the best way for sure, but more people will see your film outside of the theaters than in the theater. And that's not the best way to see the film, but when you think about issues like your brand, your mission, and in most cases, your relationship with your sponsor, this part's going to be very important and can have a huge difference in the ultimate success of the project. So I think I'll leave it there, be available for questions, and now I'll let the experts describe what these things that I've alluded to, UHD, SDR, HDR, etc. mean. Thank you.
Okay, he came in 40 seconds under, so I can chat for 40 seconds. Actually, I'll use it for my introduction for the next presenter. It's Daniel Rapo. He's a senior DI producer at FotoKem, a 16-year giant screen and IMAX post vet who spends his days producing digital intermediates and preparing deliverables on giant screen titles in all formats. His task today is targeted at demystifying UHD. Daniel?
Thanks, Andrew. It's great to be here. It's an honor to be up here with the crew that just spoke before me. So it's a bit of a daunting thing to go through some of the acronyms that are associated with the work that we do. And so I'm going to try to walk you through UHD and then the IMF master deliverable. The one thing I would just mention is, I think maybe echoing some of what's been said, is to love your deliverables. And there's no really way to get around that. It's not fun. It's not the sexy and creative part of doing what you do. But it's so important to grasp it and to embrace it. So, and then just as just mentioning about UHD, it's a deliverable that I think is well positioned, or that the giant screen industry is well positioned to easily come up with as one of your deliverables because of the high resolution that we're working in. So what is UHD? UHD is ultra-high definition. It comes after, obviously, high definition, which is 1920 by 1080. And then, so what is it? It's a broadcast TV format, and that's important to know and to keep in mind. The acronyms UHD TV1, or just simply UHD1, which is what we're most familiar with, which is 3840 by 2160 as far as the resolution. And what's lesser known is that the spec also includes UHD TV2, or UHD2, which is 7680 by 4320 as far as its resolution. Something to look forward to. Color gamuts. The color gamuts for UHD are Rec 709 and Rec 2020. And the frame rates, they're all progressive from 23976, 24, 25, 2997, all the way up to, as Pierre was telling us, up to 120. What UHD is not: any pixel resolution other than 3840 by 2160 or 7680 by 4320. It might seem obvious, but it's important to point that out. It is something that's often interchangeable with the term 4K. It is not 4K, so it's not HD, 2K, 4K, or 8K. It's also not any frame rate that's outside the SMPTE spec that we just mentioned, or any color gamut outside of Rec 709 or Rec 2020. Just as a graphic, not as jazzy as James's graphics, but something to give you a sense of where we've come and where we've come from. Oh, let me hit the slide. I forgot let me just let you grasp that for a minute, and we'll make sure that this is all available, because this is not the type of stuff that you want to write down or chew on right now, but the slides would be helpful in the future. Thank you, Andrew. So here's the graphic. Standard def, 720 by 486, and it was a huge jump, a huge leap to HD, over 6.5 times greater pixel resolution, jumping to 1920 by 1080. And so then that's where we jump from now to UHD. Here is TV1, 3840 by 2160. It's 4 times greater than HD, makes sense. And then finally, including UHD TV2, you can see how impressive an image, when we eventually get to that point, potentially, how much resolution and what the potential for the quality would be. So the question is this resolution gain really that apparent to the consumer? And the very short answer is no. And while there's a significant increase in pixels, there are many factors why a large resolution gain may not be perceived. So one of them is the way you capture, and much of UHD content originates from sub-UHD cameras. And they're sub-UHD because even if they're a 4K camera, if they have a bare array or a bare pattern, it means most of the color information is interpolated. For example, a bare pattern camera that shoots 4K actually has half the resolution of the green channel, a quarter of red, and a quarter of blue. It's pretty smart science, and it's a way to get more information onto a single chip or from a single chip, and in most scenarios it works wonderfully well. But even in this industry, we know we have to be careful when we're using a bare array, because you run into things like color contamination on sharp edges, something called zippering, or what is commonly known as jaggy edges, which is a result of not having a 3-chip setup. But having a single chip that's a bare array has a huge advantage as far as capture and consistency. But that is one of the reasons why UHD TV, you might not see the impressive results when jumping from HD. The other is just transmission of UHD content, either IP-based or broadcast stream-based. And in many applications, if not all, they use a lower bit depth, 8, lower bit rates, and compression, which do affect quality. And finally, and there's been many studies that have been conducted that have shown that a viewer to really benefit from the UHD resolution gain, would need to sit about a half a screen length away from the monitor, which for a 50-inch monitor is about 25 inches away. And that would be uncomfortable as a place to view anything from, and it'd be really frustrating for the people behind you as well. Okay, so if UHD DTV1 is not that much noticeably better from HD, from a quality standpoint, then what is the point? I think, first of all, as the slide points out, it's economics. Manufacturers can sell more units if they're delivering something to the consumer that is new and better. That's clear, and we all understand that. It's easy to communicate to somebody the difference between 8 million pixels and why that's better than just 2 million pixels. Bigger is always better. But current and future technologies are really probably what UHD is about. It's a platform, it's a step in the direction of moving to high dynamic range, which Pierre is going to speak about, where you get monitors then that instead of being the standard HD monitor, which has a maximum nit value of anywhere from 100 to 400, you have nit values starting at 1,000 all the way up to 4,000. And this is a unit of measurement of light intensity, a nit. And the more light intensity you have coming out of the monitor, the higher dynamic range you can have in the image. Wider gamuts, color gamuts, such as Rec 2020. Higher frame rates, as we learned about in detail before this, up to 120. And then potentially also enhanced audio, potentially consumer Atmos, 9.1, 11.1, 22.2. So there is a need and there's a definite value in UHD. And then I just want to briefly touch on, actually very quickly, IMF. IMF is the package, the mastering format. If I just go back here, it's the interoperable mastering format. So what does that mean? It means it's designed to maintain a commonality across multiple manufacturers. It's just a standard. It's a master file for the creation of broadcast deliverables. Very quickly, it is not a deliverable. It's a mastering format from which other deliverables are generated. So it took its design, or they looked at a DCP and thought, well, this is an efficient design. We're going to model an IMF after a DCP, but it's different where a DCP is an actual deliverable that will go to a theater that they can play. So it's a package of files including multiple language, multiple reels, subtitles, closed captioning, video inserts, everything that you could have in a DCP, and it's an adaptive format. It's continually evolving. What is it not? It's not a DCP, it's not an archive, and it's not the International Monetary Fund, which I only mention because I've been in other sessions and the words monetary and fund seem to be really important to this crew. All right. I'm sorry? Yeah, that's right. That is not what it is either. Thank you, James. It might be that, but we'd have to kill you. And I'll end with this, and this is really more something as a takeaway. Again, I can give this to you. I don't want to take any more time. It's wrapped similarly to a DCP. What's inside, J2K files in an MXF wrapped package, and the audio is similarly MXF wrapped. It's a composition playlist involved. The output profile list, which allows you to create the multiple versionings that you were going to release out for broadcast, and then package list, asset map, and the data essence. Again, now an MXS wrapped SMPTE TTML for captions and subtitles. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. He wins most acronyms in a presentation award for the panel. Okay, the next fellow up is Pierre Routhier. He's a man who needs no introduction because he was introduced at the last panel. He's a filmmaker, technical pioneer, and advanced imaging specialist, and we've asked him to explain HDR, high dynamic range, and its relationship to the giant screen. Pierre.
Thank you very much. I have like 5 or 6 minutes to explain something that would take 5 or 6 hours, so it's scientifically a bit complicated. There's lots of things, so I'll give you just a very high-level view, and you'll have to bear with me. It's very nerdy stuff. Okay, when we talk about high dynamic range, we're putting a whole set of things into a package. It's three main things that are different from what we call a standard dynamic range. It's brightness, contrast, and color gamut, which you've already started to hear about. I've put everything back in nits, since it's the unit of measure that's used on a home, and I want it to be coherent. I know theaters are in foot lumber, home is in nits. It's just engineering mumbo jumbo. The important thing is that theatrical, and most of my experiences, this has been on the Dolby system, which I've been grading for a year and a half now onto, is that for 2D, it's about twice as bright. And for 3D, if you compare to the Z-screen polarized shutter, it's about 3 times as bright. So it is much brighter in relative terms. In absolute terms, though, the earth-shattering moment is in the home, where we go. The Rec. 709 standard is at 100 nits, which is basically when you were putting electrons on phosphor on a screen in a CRT TV in the old days. There's a limit where if you go too strong, you're either going to burn your phosphor or you're going to fill people with radiation. So there was a safety cutoff, and that was it. Most modern high-def TVs are legacies of backward compatibility with the late CRTs. So the standard for Rec. 709 is at 100. Actual TVs are more around the range of 250, 300. The UHD entry level is around 1,000 nits, and that's not aspirational. That's what I was grading on a week and a half ago, 1,000 and 4,000 nits. These are 4,000 nits is 3 stops under daylight outside at noon. It's basically the equivalent of being outside with a pair of sunglasses. It's extremely bright. And this is to illustrate the point. The blue chart you see in the bottom is the relative increase we get in the theatrical with brightness, peak brightness, with the laser systems, and the green one is what we get on the home, which brings opportunity, brings also a whole series of challenges. The second point is contrast, as was eloquently put before. An 8-bit Rec. 709 is not the preferred format to put in a laser theater. The philosophical shift, if I look on the left-hand side of theatrical, basically, we're increasing the number of layers. So basically what we do is we encode from complete darkness to complete luminance a certain series of levels. Traditional film scan DPX 10-bit log space is giving you 1,024 levels. They're not all equal. Basically what happens is the allocation for changes in contrast were done with the notion of what's perceivable once you print the film out of it, because it was still a digital intermediate. So what is it that we can perceive as changes in contrast on the screen, and how many layers do we need to express that once we go back to a distribution print? The philosophical change, we're putting more layers, but we're also changing the allocation of where that grayscale goes from, black to white, but in all the different colors. So not only are we increasing the number of layers by a factor of 4, they're now based on human perceptual studies. So we're going beyond the realm of film. We're not trying to emulate what film does. We're trying to see how many layers we need for the human eye to actually perceive changes in contrast. And that's the philosophical shift, going from a device-dependent format to a viewing-dependent format. TV is a really, really refreshing welcome. 8-bit was where bandwidth was at the time, and quite frankly, what phosphor could do on a CRT TV. So Rec. 709 is a child of the best CRT TVs in the 1990s. Ultra-high def premium increases the bit rate. Aspirational to go to 12-bit, which is not going to happen. Bandwidth-wise, it's going to go to 10-bit. So you're going to have roughly the same amount of layers as you had in your DPX, but they're not going to be allocated in the same way. Theoretically, it's a more efficient system. That's the Dolby PQ, or perceptual quantizer, which has been adopted as SMPTE 2084 and has been adopted by the Consumer Electronics Association as the format of contrast for the home. So that's what we'll have to live with in the foreseeable future. The last point was color, and I don't need to beat you on the head with color gamut charts. You've seen plenty. The outskirt represents what a human eye can perceive color-wise in the real world. The shift in color gamut, the original high-def Rec. 709 was basically based on the color primaries. It's how deep can I go in my primary colors with phosphor on a CRT screen, and that was it. When we increased the color gamut, a lot of marketing images I see is they show you this is Rec. 709, this is Rec. 2020, and basically what they show us is a non-saturated image and a fully saturated image. That's not exactly what it is, because saturation is a creative choice. What it is more colors that are truer to what they are in real life. If you shoot a fire engine in Rec. 709 and project it on the screen, you can crank the saturation all you want. It's going to look orange. It's going to be very, very bright orange, but you'll never get that deep red. And what's happening now with laser and with OLED technologies in the home is we're ever increasing the color gamut outside, reaching DCI-P3, which was an emulation of film, and now we're going beyond what film could do. It doesn't mean that colors are going to be necessarily more saturated on the screen, but they're going to be more truthful to life. And if you follow this presentation, the first point should be a conclusion at which you come up with. The traditional 10-bit DPX master from your film scan is not sufficient to work in this universe. And on every project I've been so far, when they start with a 10-bit log DPX and try to invert tone mapping, basically make it fit in a bigger envelope, they're generally dissatisfied with the result, which means that we need newer formats that are much wider, which is why a lot of people are talking about rescanning their masters and going to a raw format. That's the new formats that I'm just going to briefly talk about before we run out of time. I'll start with the second one, TIFF. If you sit down with a colorist and you're doing an HDR grade, they'll typically want to work in 16-bit TIFF. This is what we call a display-referred format. Your primaries are set for the displays that's in front of you. The number of layers of contrast are made to accommodate. So what you see is what you get. It's a great format to grade with the current display technologies. The OpenEXR is your kind of like your ultimate container. It doesn't really care what you're going to display it on. This is what we call a scene-referred format. It's a mathematical encoding of what's in front of the camera, up to the camera's limit in its latitude and its analog to digital converter on board. So it will give you all of the mathematical information. So you're never going to exceed that container because the OpenEXR format is made to fit the entire human visual spectrum and go beyond it. And if you push it to floating point 32-bit, it has up to 40 stops of latitude. That's 40. You're not ever going to create something that goes beyond that because it encompasses the limit of the human visual system. So it is a new consideration, but if you don't want to be in a situation in 5 or 10 years down the road where they come up and say, well, Rec. 2020 is so 2016, now we're going with this, and now we have 16,000 layers of contrast, and now you need to go back to your raw masters, it's good to think about getting a clean OpenEXR. It's also a friendlier format when you integrate visual effects. So if you start to do all sorts of post-manipulation, rotoscoping, adding all sorts of things, doing graphics and stuff, it's good to think about having a format that's going to be future compatible. So very, very quickly to finish, HDR on the theatrical side is an increment in quality. If I take someone on the street, bring him in a theater, show him a laser projection, they'll come out saying it was a very good experience. Take the same person, put him in a room, show him north of Superior, and show him the forest fire at 4,000 nits. They're going to fall off their chair because they're going to be completely blinded when the blaze comes up. It's that bright. If you haven't seen it, it's just completely outstanding. So it is radical. It does present creative challenges, and very often we have to tone it down because what happens is the peaks are so bright that it steals the show. So you have your talent and it's backlit. All of a sudden, all you see is the backlight and your main character is invisible because of the contrast on the screen. So it's a very challenging format. That brightness comes with tremendous brightness comes tremendous responsibility. Let's put it that way. And understanding all of those file formats and making the right decision, I think that's, I'm not going to beat on the head again. It's been talked about numerous times. It's important to understand all of those things before you go too far in your project. That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, we have one more panelist. Thank you for hanging in there with us. We're running a little over, but there's a lot of good stuff to present. This fellow is with Sony. His name is Pierre Routhier. He's the marketing and technology manager for Sony's large sensor digital motion picture cameras. His background includes high-level engineering support in broadcast and production, extensive experience in digital cinematography for television and motion picture production. He's here today to introduce us to the new Sony UHD 4K home video disc. Peter.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Good, excellent. All right, so who takes great pride in their work? Yes? All right, who wants to preserve their work as much as possible all the way into the home? Yes? Okay, so that's 4K Blu-ray, pretty much. It's not Sony specific. There's a number of manufacturers surrounding the technology. They got together and they came up with this wonderful new technology that continues the wonderful legacy of HD Blu-ray. Who knows and has seen HD Blu-ray? Yeah, I mean it's extraordinary, but 4K Blu-ray takes it way beyond what we're used to in high definition. So for years, Blu-ray has been the gold standard for HD picture quality, video files, and ordinary consumers have and continue to appreciate reliable, high-quality experience made possible by the collaboration of many different manufacturers who've developed the format. It's been enhanced to deliver a new level of picture quality that until now could only be seen in a mastering suite. Ultra HD Blu-ray is the superior format to deliver the features to the next generation displays, which we'll also talk about here. So manufacturers typically commission very extensive studies. These are for a number of reasons, to develop new technologies, to understand the trends in the market, and especially for the consumer, which is, it's very difficult to, outside of product sales, it's very difficult to gather intelligence on what's happening with the consumer. The display market continues to be extremely competitive, and large high-resolution televisions have become extremely affordable, as we know. This opens up opportunity for new delivery formats like Ultra HD Blu-ray. The trend is increasing dramatically with 4K televisions into the home. We expect it'll happen sooner than 2019 with a 40% or higher saturation, but the studies so far indicate that. And with the 4K TVs, large screen sizes make deficient picture quality noticeable even to mainstream consumers. For those that watched a movie in the cinema, it can be very hard to watch that same movie at home with network-delivered platforms built for convenience and breadth for selection rather than the quality. And so the displays continue to improve dramatically into the home, and they're getting bigger. And of course now with the new 4K TVs being delivered, high dynamic range as well, it's started, and it's becoming a very exciting time to be watching it at home. How do we see Ultra HD right now? There are a number of services offering UHD with or without high dynamic range. Premium level displays in the market can take advantage of these services, but the reproduced image quality varies widely as a function of bit rate and master quality. The streaming is very, very good, but it can suffer from packet loss and other characteristics that impact the image quality. The availability of live HDR content also make it justifiable to purchase the premium level displays with the high dynamic range capability. So while many mainstream consumers enjoy the convenience of network-delivered subscription services, Blu-ray continues to be favored among those that want reliable premium picture and sound. And the benefit that the disc brings today is the economic delivery of large files with very affordable media. In short, UHD Blu-ray has a valuable place in the market for discriminating consumers. You definitely want to take a look at it if you haven't already seen it. So the key characteristics are UHD resolution, the much higher bit depth of 10-bit versus the original 8-bit, and of course the high dynamic range, which Pierre was talking about earlier. This is a quick couple of triangles here. Pierre already mentioned it, so I'm just going to hit this very briefly. Rec 2020, you can see on the right, is a very large color space container. On the left, we have the DCI P3, which is theatrical, and Rec 709. As you can see with the Rec 2020, there's quite a bit more color available within that container. Whether or not it's utilized depends on the display, and it also depends on your mastering process, your post-production process. It's very important when you select a high-end motion picture camera, you preserve for at least that Rec 2020, and with the Sony Gamut profiles, they're actually quite a bit wider. So it's very important that you test everything ahead of time and evaluate the picture quality, especially with the color science. So as I mentioned, with the Blu-ray, with all of its wonderful capability, UHD Blu-ray comes with the challenge creating masters that take advantage of it. The introduction of Blu-ray has caused a sea change in the way content was mastered and QC'd for HD release, and UHD and HDR are especially more revealing of defects, scaling, sharpening, and color grading. So you definitely want to pay attention to your post-production process and test the workflows, the lenses, the cameras, and everything else. All right, next slide. Can't see. So the specifications of UHD Blu-ray, as you can see here, it's HEVC H.265 encoding at 10-bit 420. Standard high-definition Blu-ray is H.264. The 265 brings a number of advantages, including much better picture quality at the lower data rates. And the other big advantage is the disk capacities here. You can see the data rates. We have a significant jump on data rates that we're able to encode. Standard HD Blu-ray was up to 40 megabits per second. Most encoding would be a variable bit rate, which would start at a minimum and go up to a maximum, and allow the encoder to breathe to generate that picture quality. With Ultra HD Blu-ray, you can see here with the triple layer disc, we can get up to above 120 megabits per second, which is a massive jump into the home, and it looks absolutely spectacular. And those of you that realize what an achievement it is to have a low-cost device and content that can deliver a quad HD picture at 60 frames per second. You can see the frame rates here up to 60p. There can be challenges making new products that integrate with legacy equipment and cabling, and the content security and bandwidth requirements are going to require some updates, obviously. But there's a huge advantage here with the picture quality and with the high dynamic range capabilities that the Blu-ray specification will bring into the home. With the encryption, encryption's taken very seriously. It's gotten a lot stronger now with the new version of the HDCP, and it's very, very good. So the compatibility, you can see here, it is backwards compatibility with standard Blu-ray discs, so you can take a HD Blu-ray and bring it into a UHD Blu-ray drive and it will work no problem. Digital copy functions have been specified, but they're optional for device implementation. And the new players can also play back existing standard dynamic range HD Blu-rays and also convert to standard dynamic range monitors, which generally happens within the player. And the backwards compatibility with the existing discs also includes seamless branching and Java. As you might know, Java is a very powerful programming language that can offer very, very significant interactivity with the viewer with the disc. It's been kind of taken advantage of in standard Blu-ray, HD Blu-ray, but you really do want to take advantage of it with the 4K Blu-ray because you can have a very interactive, highly interactive environment for the viewer that can reach out to museum servers for further educational content and so forth. I mean, the sky's the limit. It's a very powerful programming, interactive environment that you definitely want to take advantage of. Movies that have been released. It's happening very, very quickly. You can see here, this is just an example of some of the movies that have been released in UHD Blu-ray. Now, some of them are actually up-converted because they weren't originated in 4K from the acquisition standpoint, but they're still going to look very good. They're not going to look, obviously, as good as 4K originated content, but it's a huge step forward. And of course, with high dynamic range, as far as I know, this is the first one released in HDR, shot HD, up-converted to 4K, but produced in high dynamic range. And for you guys, big congratulations, is the Journey to Space. It's the first one with both a 3D and a UHD release in the same disc. So really it's a win for everybody. Consumers win, the filmmakers win, you guys get to preserve your original content at a much higher level that's previously been possible into the home. And of course the studios win as well. That concludes my quick presentation. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, can we talk about UHD and 3D?
On now? Okay. As far as I know, it would be good to ask Peter this, but as far as I know, there's no plans for 3D UHD. There's no TVs yet, and I've not heard of any plan for it yet. Yeah.
So the question was, is 2.0 sufficient, or does it require 2.0A for the new TVs?
No, just 2.0.
Good.
Wow. Okay. Oh, all right. One last question. Mr. Reyna.
My experience in the past year in remastering for HDR has taught me something which I think is a valuable lesson to people that are producing content, and that is that they should be thinking about HDR when they are in production, and that they should be looking at their content in HDR. So when you're on the set, there are now HDR monitors that you can look at, and there are the problem that I encountered in restoring and mastering old content is that with HDR you see so much more detail. You see so much more in your highlights and your lowlights, and you could be optimizing your production for the optimum look.
Yeah. So can I get sound on the mic, please? Thanks. So most of my data comes from Dolby, because when we began one of our projects, the first thing we did was shoot test shots and go screen it. On the IMAX side, it was not available for a number of reasons, so we went with Dolby, and that's the first thing we did, is shoot a bunch of stuff and go put it in HDR in the theatrical system. That's one thing. You also need to watch the home version, which is a whole different environment, because you may have the same level of contrast and the same gamut. You have 40 to 100 times more brightness. And what happens on a lot of shots that are carefully photographed, all of a sudden the subtle highlights in the hair, and the DOP does a wonderful job. You put this at 1,000 nits and that's all you see is the highlight. Your carefully constructed backlight all of a sudden obscures the character in front, because it creates contrast within the frame with that huge difference in light. So just like I've heard time and time again over this week that you need to shoot for the dome and go see the dome and learn what the dome is, well, it's the same thing for HDR. And you need to do this before you go shooting, otherwise you're going to have many, many surprises. And one quick thing on this, it's not everything that's going to be outstanding in HDR. Contrast is there when it's 35,000 nits outside, because we're midday and there's sun and there's shade and everything else. If you're in a shaded area, if the cloud comes out, all of a sudden you're losing the dynamic range. In the theatrical side, you get advantage because you get more resolution in the shadows. So you get a lot more sensitivity in the dark areas, and you get more subtlety because the peak brightness is not that high in a cinema. Someone opens a phone, and it's very disruptive because the phone is brighter than the screen you're looking at. In the home, it's a whole different ball game. Where when it's shady outside, you send standard dynamic range and high dynamic range to the same monitor, it's going to look roughly the same, because you have maybe 6, 7 stops of exposure. That device is designed to do incredibly bright lights. It's not designed to do detail in the shadow. It will display detail in the shadow, but the highlights are so bright that your eye can't perceive it. So just saying, I mean, like I said, we could literally spend several hours on the subject, but the first thing to do is go sit down and see what it does before you venture too far. Does that answer the
We're going to have to wrap it up. Thank you very much for hanging in there, for coming at all, and please stay for the next session, which is going to be even better.